On the evening of June 9th, 2026, a Tuesday that would later be remembered as the night the Vatican stopped whispering and started shouting, an encrypted communication left the Secretariat of State. It was not a press release. It was not a pastoral letter. It was a summons. Every cardinal in the Roman Catholic Church, all 230 of them, scattered across 6 continents, received the same directive in the same hour: report to Rome, within 5 days. No exceptions, no proxies, no excuses. The message carried the personal seal of Pope Leo XIV, and it carried one more thing that made the blood of every recipient run cold. It carried no explanation. When word spread, and it spread fast, the first reaction across the Catholic world was not curiosity. It was fear. Because in the modern history of the Church, a pope does not summon every living cardinal to Rome unless something has broken, or unless something is about to break. What happened inside those closed doors over the next 4 days would shake the foundations of the oldest continuous institution on earth. And the full story has never been told, until now. Before we continue, if this story keeps you watching, subscribe to the channel and leave a comment telling us where you're watching from. Your support is what keeps these investigations coming. To understand why that encrypted message sent shockwaves through every diocese and archdiocese on the planet, you need to understand what an extraordinary plenary consistory actually means. A consistory is a formal meeting of the College of Cardinals with the Pope. Ordinary consistories happen regularly, sometimes to approve canonizations or discuss administrative matters. They are routine, expected, forgettable. An extraordinary plenary consistory is none of those things. The word plenary means all, every cardinal, not a selected group, not the ones who happen to be in Rome, all of them. And the word extraordinary means this was not scheduled, not anticipated, and not part of any known agenda. The last time a sitting pope called every cardinal to Rome outside of a conclave, outside of the process of electing a new pope, was so long ago that most cardinals alive today had never experienced one. And the way this one was delivered made it even more alarming. The communication did not go through normal Vatican channels. It did not pass through the various nunciatures or diplomatic pouches. It was sent directly, encrypted, from the Secretariat of State to each cardinal's personal secure contact. Some received it by encrypted email, others by sealed courier. A handful, the ones in the most remote postings, by satellite phone. The uniformity of the delivery was itself a message. This was not a suggestion. This was not an invitation. This was an order from the Vicar of Christ. Catholic media erupted within hours. Speculation was immediate and wild. Was Pope Leo XIV resigning? He was only 70 years old, young by papal standards, but the precedent set by Benedict XVI in 2013 had permanently altered expectations. Was there a doctrinal crisis? A financial scandal worse than anything that had come before? Had the Pope received a medical diagnosis? The Vatican press office said nothing, absolutely nothing, and that silence was the loudest sound in Christendom. What very few people knew at that moment, what would only emerge in fragments over the following weeks, was that Robert Francis Prevost, the 267th Bishop of Rome, born in Chicago on September 14, 1955, former Prior General of the Augustinian Order, former Bishop of Chiclayo in Peru, former Prefect of the Dicastery for Bishops, elected Pope on May 8, 2025, following the death of Pope Francis on April 21st of that year, had been working on something in near total secrecy for months, not weeks, months, and the circle of people who knew the full scope of what he was planning could be counted on one hand, with fingers to spare. 3, maybe 4 advisors. That was it. The rest of the Curia, the vast bureaucratic machinery that runs the daily operations of a church of over 1 billion souls, was in the dark. And they knew they were in the dark, and that terrified them. Leaked fragments had surfaced in the preceding weeks, but they were contradictory and confusing. One source close to the Vatican suggested a radical restructuring of church governance, a decentralization of power away from the Roman Curia and toward regional bishops' conferences around the world. Another source, this one closer to the diplomatic corps, hinted at a bold geopolitical stance, something related to the Pope's engagement with global conflicts. A third rumor, the most explosive of all, suggested that Leo XIV was preparing a major appointment or series of appointments that would fundamentally reshape the College of Cardinals itself. None of these rumors could be confirmed. All of them turned out to contain a grain of truth, but the full picture was bigger than any of them. The arrivals began on Wednesday, June 11th. Fiumicino Airport, Leonardo da Vinci International, Rome's main gateway to the world, became a staging ground for one of the most extraordinary gatherings in modern church history. Cardinals arrived on commercial flights, on chartered planes, on connections routed through Frankfurt and Dubai and Sao Paulo. They arrived in clerical black and in civilian clothing. Some came with a single secretary. Others came alone, carrying nothing but a small bag, and the weight of whatever they feared was waiting for them. One image that circulated on Italian social media, taken by a traveler in the arrivals hall, showed an elderly African cardinal, 84 years old, being pushed in a wheelchair by a young priest. The cardinal's face was drawn with exhaustion. He had traveled for over 20 hours from a diocese in Central Africa. He was frail, he was ill, and he had come anyway, because the summons said non-optional. And when the Pope says non-optional, you do not negotiate. A Latin American cardinal who had not been to Rome since 2023 was spotted at a Vatican guest house on Thursday morning. He had been critical of the Curia in public statements. Publicly, loudly, repeatedly critical. He had questioned the pace of reform. He had questioned the distribution of resources. He had questioned whether the Vatican understood anything about the realities faced by the Church in the developing world. And yet here he was, in Rome, answering the summons like every other cardinal on earth. His presence was itself a statement, a signal that whatever was happening, it had pulled even the dissenters back into the fold. Another arrival drew attention. A cardinal from Southeast Asia, one of the youngest members of the college at 58, was seen entering the Casa Santa Marta, the Vatican guest house, where Pope Francis had famously chosen to live and where Leo XIV had continued to reside. This cardinal had been appointed by Leo himself just months earlier and was considered a key ally of the Pope's reform agenda. His calm demeanor stood in contrast to the visible anxiety of others. When a journalist called out a question to him in the courtyard, he smiled, said nothing, and kept walking. By Thursday evening, the atmosphere in Vatican corridors was electric. Small clusters of 2 and 3 cardinals could be seen in hallways, in courtyards, at dinner tables in the guest houses. They spoke in low voices. They leaned close. They watched each other with the careful eyes of men who have spent decades navigating the most complex political institution in human history. Alliances were forming. Information was being traded. But the central question remained unanswered. What does the Pope want? Think about that for a moment. 230 of the most powerful men in the Catholic Church gathered in one city, and not one of them knew for certain why they were there. On Friday morning, June 12th, the answer came. The venue was the Aula Paolo VI, the Paul VI Audience Hall, the vast modernist auditorium designed by Pier Luigi Nervi, capable of holding thousands. On this morning, it held only cardinals, no staff, no secretaries, no press, no observers. The Swiss Guard sealed every entrance, every phone, every tablet, every recording device was confiscated at the door. Each cardinal passed through a security checkpoint that would not have been out of place at a military installation. They were given nothing, no agenda, no briefing document, no outline of what they were about to hear. The doors closed at 9 in the morning, and for the next several hours, the Aula Paolo VI became the most impenetrable room on earth. Think about that image. The largest enclosed audience hall in Vatican City, a space built to hold 12,000 people, now occupied by fewer than 250. The empty seats magnified the solemnity. The curved concrete ceiling, the dramatic bronze sculpture of the resurrection behind the stage, the vast windows filtering Roman light. And in that enormous space, the entire leadership of the Catholic Church, sitting in silence, waiting. Some cardinals later described the minutes before the Pope entered as among the most tense of their lives. There was no small talk, no murmuring, just the sound of 230 men breathing, shifting in their chairs, and waiting for the door at the side of the stage to open. What we know about what happened inside comes from sources who spoke on condition of absolute anonymity in the days and weeks that followed. Their accounts are consistent. Their details corroborate each other, and the picture they paint is one of the most dramatic moments in the modern papacy. Pope Leo XIV entered the hall without ceremony. No processional, no fanfare. He wore a simple white cassock, the everyday garment of a pope, not the formal vestments of a solemn occasion. He carried no papers. No prepared text was visible. He walked to the front of the hall, looked out at the assembled cardinals, and began to speak. He spoke for approximately 45 minutes. His voice, according to multiple sources, was calm, measured, unhurried, but it carried something that every person in that room recognized immediately. It carried absolute authority. This was not a man seeking consensus. This was not a man floating ideas. This was a man telling the princes of the church what was going to happen. He began with the state of the church. He spoke about declining attendance in Europe and North America. He spoke about the explosive growth of Catholicism in Africa and Asia. He spoke about the gap between the Vatican's institutional structures, most of which were designed for a European church in a European world, and the reality of a global faith with its center of gravity shifting south and east with every passing year. He spoke about financial transparency, about the scandals that had eroded trust, about the mechanisms of accountability that existed on paper but not in practice. And then he laid out his vision, a fundamental reform of Vatican governance. Regional bishops' conferences around the world would receive unprecedented autonomy on pastoral matters, the ability to adapt liturgical practices, pastoral programs, and administrative structures to local needs without requiring Rome's approval for every decision. The Curia itself would be restructured. Several dicasteries would be merged. Others would be eliminated entirely. New accountability mechanisms would be created, with external oversight for the first time in the Church's history. Financial transparency measures would be implemented that went further than anything Pope Francis had attempted during his pontificate. The hall was silent. Not the silence of agreement, not the silence of shock, the silence of men who were still processing, men who were calculating, men who were trying to understand the full implications of what they were hearing. And then the Pope said one more thing, and this is where the silence turned into something else entirely. He proposed that the College of Cardinals itself be reformed. The first element was relatively modest. The mandatory retirement age for voting rights in a conclave would be raised from 80 to 85. This would expand the pool of cardinal electors and, not coincidentally, include several older cardinals who were known supporters of reform. But the second element was not modest at all. Leo XIV proposed that in extraordinary circumstances, lay people, men and women, could be given the title of cardinal with advisory roles, non-voting, without the right to participate in a conclave, but with the title, the dignity, and the formal role of advising the Pope on matters of church governance. This was not without precedent, and the Pope knew it, and he said so. Before the 1917 Code of Canon Law, lay cardinals had existed. Men who were not ordained priests had held the title of cardinal. It was an established part of church history. It had simply fallen out of practice for over a century. But restoring it now, in this form, with the explicit inclusion of women, was something no one in that room had expected, not even his closest allies. The reaction was immediate and visceral. According to sources present in the hall, a block of younger cardinals, many of them from the global south, from Africa, from Asia, from Latin America, stood and applauded. Not politely, not reservedly. They stood and they clapped, and some of them called out words of support. An elderly European cardinal, a veteran of decades in the Curia, sat frozen in his seat. His hands rested on his knees. He did not move. He did not speak. His face, according to one source, looked as if he had received news of a death. Cardinal Victor Manuel Fernandez, the Argentine theologian serving as prefect of the dicastery for the doctrine of the faith, was seen nodding slowly, not enthusiastically, slowly, deliberately, as if he was turning each word over in his mind and finding that it fit. A senior Italian cardinal, a man who had served in the Curia for over 30 years, turned to the cardinal seated next to him and whispered something. The cardinal next to him closed his eyes and shook his head. The noise in the hall built, voices overlapping, some raised in support, others in objection. The acoustics of the Aula Paolo VI, designed for papal audiences and concerts, amplified every sound into a wash of competing emotions. Pope Leo XIV raised his hand. Silence fell instantly. 230 men, princes of the church, men accustomed to authority and deference, went quiet at the gesture of one man's raised palm. That, more than anything else described by sources, tells you everything you need to know about the authority Robert Francis Prevost commands. And then he spoke the words that would define this pontificate, words that would be quoted, debated, praised, and condemned for years to come. I did not bring you here to ask your permission. I brought you here because you deserve to hear this from me, face to face, before the world hears it. This church belongs to all of us, and it is time the way we govern it reflects that truth. Let that sink in for a moment. A pope, standing before every cardinal in the world, telling them that he is not asking for their approval, that he has already made his decision, that this meeting is not a consultation, it is a notification, delivered in person, out of respect, but a notification nonetheless. No pope in living memory has spoken to the College of Cardinals with that kind of directness. Popes consult, popes suggest. Popes issue documents that take years to draft and decades to implement. They do not stand before the assembled princes of the church and say, in effect, this is happening, and I wanted you to hear it from me. But that is exactly what Leo XIV did. And in doing so, he drew a line, not between reformers and conservatives, not between the global south and the global north. He drew a line between the papacy as it had been understood for centuries and the papacy as he intended to exercise it. A papacy of action, of decision, of forward motion that does not wait for the slowest member of the procession. The session ended shortly after. Cardinals filed out into the Roman sunlight. Some walked in groups, others walked alone. The Swiss Guard maintained the security cordon. Phones were returned, but the conversations that followed were not conducted on phones. They were conducted in whispers, in closed rooms, in the ancient art of face-to-face politics that the Vatican has perfected over 2,000 years. Within hours, a group of 15 to 20 conservative cardinals requested a private audience with the Pope. This was expected. This was, in fact, part of the plan. Leo XIV agreed to meet with them, but he attached a condition that caught them off guard. He would meet each one individually, not as a group. "I will not negotiate with a faction," he said, according to a source familiar with the exchange. "I will listen to brothers, one at a time." This was not just a pastoral gesture, it was a tactical masterstroke. A group of 20 cardinals presenting a unified front is a political force. 20 individual cardinals, each sitting alone across from the Pope, each making their case without the reinforcement of allies beside them, is something very different. It is 20 private conversations in which the most powerful man in the Catholic Church gives you his undivided attention, looks you in the eye, and asks you to explain your concerns. Over the next 36 hours, through Friday afternoon, through all of Saturday, June 13th, the Pope met with 12 of the approximately 20 who had requested audiences. Each meeting lasted between 15 and 25 minutes. What was said in those meetings has never been disclosed. Sources describe the Pope as patient, attentive, willing to listen, but also immovable. He heard their concerns. He acknowledged their fears. He did not change his position. One source, close to a cardinal who attended one of these private meetings, described the experience in a single word: overwhelming. Not because the Pope was aggressive, not because he was dismissive, but because he was so thoroughly prepared, so deeply certain, that the cardinal in question left the meeting feeling not defeated, but simply outmatched. He had thought about every objection before we raised it, this source said. Every single one. Another source described a different meeting. In this one, the cardinal had come prepared with a list of canonical and theological objections. He spoke for several minutes. The Pope listened without interrupting. When the cardinal finished, Leo XIV responded to each point in order, from memory, citing specific historical precedents, specific documents, specific passages from church teaching. The cardinal left the meeting visibly shaken, not angry, shaken, as if he had walked into what he expected to be a debate and found himself in a classroom. This is the detail that observers keep returning to when they try to explain the events of that week. The preparation, the months of secret work. The fact that Leo XIV did not improvise this. He did not wake up one morning and decide to reshape the governance of the Church. He planned it, methodically, patiently, with the precision of a man who had spent his entire career inside institutions and understood exactly how they resist change, and exactly how that resistance can be overcome. And here is where something unprecedented happened. Something that, in the age of social media and 24-hour news cycles and instant leaks and anonymous sourcing, should have been impossible. For 36 hours after the closed session on Friday morning, nothing leaked. Nothing. 230 cardinals, their secretaries, their staffs, the Vatican personnel who had arranged logistics for the largest gathering of cardinals in decades, hundreds of people with knowledge of the event. And for a day and a half, not a single detail reached the press. Not a whisper, not a hint, not a cryptic tweet from a Vatican insider. This silence was itself the most powerful testament to the gravity of what had occurred. These men, whatever their disagreements, understood that what they had witnessed was historic, and they held the line. Whether out of loyalty or fear or simple shock, they held the line. The break came on Saturday evening, June 13th. A junior secretary in a European diocese, someone far from the inner circles of power but connected enough to have received a summary from his cardinal, mentioned the words structural reforms during a phone call. The call was overheard. The phrase was noted. It reached a journalist, then a second leak. From the entourage of an African cardinal, a brief mention of changes to the college in a conversation at a Roman restaurant, a waiter who spoke English, a phone call to a contact at a news agency. The pieces began to come together. By Sunday morning, the major wire services were running the story. Fragmentary, incomplete, but enough. Catholic media went into overdrive. Progressive Catholic publications ran cautiously hopeful analyses. Traditional Catholic outlets published alarmed editorials. Secular media picked up the story and ran it through their own lenses. Government reactions began to trickle in, most of them carefully neutral, because no government wants to be on the wrong side of the Vatican without knowing where the chips will fall. The Vatican Press Office, that legendary institution whose capacity for strategic silence has been refined over centuries, issued a single-line statement. The Holy Father convened an extraordinary consistory to discuss matters of church governance. A formal communication will follow at the appropriate time. One line, no details, no timeline, no confirmation or denial of any specific proposal. Just the acknowledgement that the meeting had occurred, which was already public knowledge, and the promise of more information at some undefined future point. It was a masterclass in saying nothing while appearing to say something, but the world was already reacting. Catholic commentators divided sharply along predictable lines. Those who had supported the reform agenda of Pope Francis saw in Leo XIV's moves a continuation and acceleration of that vision. Those who had resisted Francis saw something worse, because Francis had been a pastor, a man who governed through suggestion and example, and the slow turning of institutional culture. Leo XIV, it was becoming clear, was something different. He was an administrator, a man who understood institutions from the inside, a man who knew which levers to pull and when and how hard. The difference between a pope who suggests change and a pope who implements change is the difference between a weather forecast and a hurricane. And the hurricane was already making landfall. Within Catholic universities, theologians began debating the canonical basis for lay cardinals. Some pointed to the pre-1917 precedents as clear justification. Others argued that the intervening century of practice had effectively established a new norm. The debate was fierce, scholarly, and deeply divided. But it was also, in a way, beside the point, because the Pope was not asking for academic approval any more than he had asked for the Cardinal's permission. He was moving. The scholars could debate while he moved. In parishes around the world, ordinary Catholics were learning about the consistory through fragments on social media and news alerts on their phones. The reactions ranged from bewilderment to excitement to fear. In a parish in Manila, a priest was asked by a parishioner after morning mass what it meant. He said he honestly did not know. In a cathedral in Cologne, a bishop told his staff to prepare for questions he could not yet answer. In a small church in rural Mexico, a nun who had served the community for 30 years wept when she heard the words "women" and "cardinal" in the same sentence. Political analysts noted the geopolitical implications. A decentralized church, one in which regional bishops' conferences had real autonomy, would be a church that could engage more flexibly with local political realities. In Africa, where the church was growing fastest, this could mean a more assertive Catholic voice on issues of governance and human rights. In Asia, it could mean new approaches to interfaith dialogue. In Latin America, the Pope's adopted home for decades, it could mean a renewed engagement with social justice movements that had defined the Church's identity in the region for generations. And the proposal about lay cardinals, particularly the inclusion of women, sent shockwaves through every corner of the Catholic world. It was carefully framed: advisory only, non-voting, no participation in conclaves, no claim to ordination or priestly authority. But the symbolism was enormous. A woman wearing the red hat, a woman with the title of cardinal, a woman sitting in formal sessions of advice to the Pope. Whether or not it changed the theology, it changed the optics. And in an institution that has survived for 2 millennia, partly through its mastery of symbolism, optics matter. Now consider where we are. This story is still unfolding. The formal communication promised by the Vatican press office has not yet been issued. The specific mechanisms of implementation have not been announced. The timeline is unknown. The opposition has not yet organized its full response. The media has not yet obtained a complete picture. We are standing in the middle of something, not at its end. But what we can see, even from this vantage point, is a papacy that has made a choice to move, and to move fast, and to move with a clarity of purpose that the Vatican has not exhibited in decades. And we can see something else. We can see that this Pope understands something that many of his predecessors struggled with. He understands that the Church does not exist in isolation from the world, that the structures of governance that served a European institution in the 15th century cannot serve a global institution in the 21st, that the faithful in Lagos and Lima and Hanoi and Chicago deserve a church that speaks to their reality, not to a reality that disappeared generations ago. On the night of Saturday, June 13th, after the last of his private meetings with the conservative cardinals, after the staff had retired, after the corridors of the Apostolic Palace had gone quiet, Pope Leo XIV was alone. He was in his private chapel, the small, simple room where every night the 267th Bishop of Rome kneels and speaks to the God he has served since he was a young Augustinian seminarian in the American Midwest. A crucifix on the wall, a single candle, the silence of a building that has housed popes and their burdens for centuries. Outside, somewhere in the city, 230 cardinals were processing what they had heard. Some were making phone calls to trusted allies in their home dioceses. Some were drafting careful memos to their staffs. Some were praying just as he was, asking the same question in 100 different languages. What happens now? The weight of what he had set in motion was immense. He knew the pushback would be fierce. He knew that some would call him reckless, that some would accuse him of overreach, that some would question whether a pope who had been in office for just over a year had the standing to propose changes of this magnitude. But he also knew something else. He knew that the Church had been here before, at the Council of Trent, when the Reformation threatened to tear Christendom apart, at the First Vatican Council, when the modern world demanded a response the Church was not yet ready to give, at the Second Vatican Council, when John XXIII threw open the windows and let the air in. At each of those moments, the institution had faced the same choice, the same terrifying, clarifying choice: change and face the chaos that change brings, or stay the same and face the slow erosion that stagnation guarantees. Robert Francis Prevost, the kid from Chicago, the Augustinian friar, the bishop who had walked the dusty streets of Chiclayo and listened to the poor and the forgotten, the quiet administrator who had risen through the ranks not by ambition but by competence, the man who had been chosen by his brother cardinals to lead a church of 1.4 billion souls, had made his choice. And on that Saturday night, kneeling in the dim light of his chapel, he spoke words that only he and God could hear. But the meaning of those words had already been made clear to the world. In the Aula Paulo VI, in the private meetings, In the silence he maintained while the world speculated. In every decision he had made since the moment that encrypted message left the Secretariat of State 5 days earlier. The meaning was this: the Church would move, the Church would change. The Church would look at itself honestly, for the first time in a very long time, and ask whether the way it governed 1 billion souls was worthy of the mission it claimed to serve. And if the answer was no, then the structures would bend, or they would break, but they would not stay the same. This Church will not be governed by fear, not while I sit in this chair. If this story moved you, if it made you think about what leadership looks like when the stakes are this high, subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss a story. Leave a comment below and tell us what you think. Should the Pope have done this? Was he right to act without waiting for consensus? Or has he gone too far? We read every comment, and your perspective matters. Until next time.